All right. Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, The Science Behind the Health and Safety of Fiberglass and Mineral Wool. My name is Kim Melton, and I'm going to be the moderator and co-host for today's presentation. So, Bruce, our very first question is, are there inherent hazards for installing both materials, referring to mineral wool and fiberglass?
The hazards of manufacturing, using and installing fiberglass and mineral wool are those related to temporary mechanical irritation. Those are easily addressed through proper protective equipment in the form of gloves, long sleeve shirt, long pants. We also recommend eye protection. We don't recommend respiratory protection with the N95 dust mask unless you're going to have fiber concentrations greater than 1 fiber per cc, and that's over an 8-hour, that's a weighted average over an 8-hour shift. And that's the concentration that is basically promoted by OSHA, as well as the the fiberglass insulation industry.
Excellent. The next question is an interesting one, and that is, why does the idea that fiberglass is a carcinogen still persist even after science has disproved it?
Yeah, good question. I think there's a couple of reasons for it, I think. One is that there are folks out there who don't know the science, and one of the ways that we deal with that is through webinars like this. And we do see, on a fairly regular basis, manufacturers of alternative forms of insulation alleging that fiberglass and mineral wool supposedly have some sort of cancer hazard. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt and say they don't know the science, but sometimes they know the science and they're just making an inappropriate claim. I think, though, there's also some confusion out there between the different ways that IARC made its decision versus NTP. Remember, IARC in 2001 removed insulation fiberglass from its list of possible carcinogens, and they focused on the use, insulation. The NTP, a decade later, did not follow IARC in its reasoning. They just said, really, because by then the science was so well established about dose dimension and durability, so that rather than saying, oh, all insulation glass fibers are off the carcinogens list, NTP said, we're going to presume everything's a carcinogen unless it's been exonerated by an animal test. So I guess there are some people who read maybe the first couple of sentences of the NTP substance profile, and they say glass fibers are reasonably anticipated to cause cancer. They don't read the next paragraph that says it's only the durable fibers. Excellent.
So the next question is, are the exposure level results for discussion based on the air quality monitoring evaluation recently conducted by NEMA?
Yes. What NEMA, and this is one of the things that was part of the original product, the Health and Safety Product Partnership between our trade association NEMA and OSHA. We kept saying we think exposures are low. OSHA said, well, you better prove it. You have to have an exposure database. So we have a very comprehensive database. I think we have over 18,000 QA/QC'd IH database points in our database, exposure points in our database, and we are in the process of getting an article published that updates that database. And there were many samples that were collected really fairly recently, 2018, 2019. This is one of the things that we want to do as an industry. We want to make sure that we are updating the science where and when we can, and we're in the process of updating that, not only updating the exposure database, but updating a peer-reviewed journal article based on the database.
All right. The next question is interior duct insulation still a good answer for noise and air temperature losses? And I can actually answer this one. Absolutely. Fiberglass is an excellent solution for noise control, and certainly an excellent solution for temperature control as well. And then, as we discussed, you're not seeing a proliferation of fibers in the airstream, and certainly in the air that people in occupied space as a result of lining ducts. So we would absolutely recommend that duct liner can still be used and should be used for noise and temperature control. That actually also answers the second one, which is it safe inside ductwork? Yes, it is also safe inside ductwork. Bruce, the next one is for you, and that is what would the product stewardship programs consist of?
We answered that. We had a slide on that. Product stewardship program is that first of all, we investigate the hazards, we communicate the hazards, and then we communicate ways to mitigate the hazards. And you see that's part of the stewardship program. We also look to see what the exposure is. So it's the hazard, it's the exposure, it's the protective equipment, and it's ways to avoid any kind of hazard. Those are kind of the core elements of the product stewardship program.
Excellent. So the next question is, which insulation is the best performer and which one should be specified above the other? This question really, I mean, there's no one-size-fits-all insulation for every solution. It really depends on the application. So, you know, fiberglass and mineral wool are both excellent for acoustics. If you want to look at your highest R value per inch, you're going to look at a polyiso board. It really depends on what you are looking to insulate and what you would like to do with it, what your goals are. So with that, we would definitely refer anybody who wants an insulation comparison. We could refer you to our website. There's plenty of information on there. And then if you have any questions, you can reach out to our Tech Connect team or our technical team here at JM. Bruce, I don't know if you know the answer to this one or not, but is spray insulation applicable in a residential attic space that's also being used for storage? And are there any respiratory risks after the insulation has already been sprayed?
I think, I mean, if you've got an attic space where loose fill fiberglass insulation has been blown between the rafters on the attic floor, one of the things, you don't want to compress that insulation down by putting, say, plywood down and then using it for storage. Because then you'll get a diminution in the R value. Once it's in place, we really don't expect any kind of fiber exposure, though.
Okay. The next question is, what is the future of conventional insulation?
The future is very bright, right? No, I think fiberglass and mineral wool insulation have been around for a long time. They have a proven track record of thermal and acoustic performance as well as safety. So I think, you know, with that kind of history, I think the future is bright. So, and Kim, I know we're getting to towards the top of the hour, but we can stay on for additional questions. That's not a problem, yeah. I think, right?
Absolutely. So we're going to sit tight here. We will continue. We have a lot of questions that have come in, so we'll continue to work our way through this list. And if you have to drop off, all of these questions will be available recorded online. So, but thank you for anybody who has to leave now, and we'll continue on for anybody who would like to stay on. The question we have next is, how does the human body deal with fine glass particles or fibers that get into the lungs but are not exhaled?
We showed that in a couple of the slides for the biosoluble fibers that are used for insulation. Those fibers that are of such a, you know, the smaller diameter fibers that they're deeply respirable. It's really the, what they call the alveolar macrophages that we were talking about that actually will engulf the fibers, dissolve them, and then carry them out of the lung. So those biosoluble fibers, they either undergo what we had in that figure of congruent dissolution where they basically dissolve to nothing, or they undergo transverse breakage, and then they're engulfed by macrophages and taken out of the lung.
All right. Is e-glass safe as well?
Yeah, e-glass is a special type of chemistry for glass, typically for electrical resistance and insulating. The hazard of any glass or mineral wool fiber, remember, is controlled by the 3 Ds. I know that, for example, Johns Manville makes e-glass, but they do it really as a reinforcement fiber. Those diameters on those fibers are so large, they're not respirable. so that even if you could, based on chemistry or whatever, understand that E-glass is more durable, if it's not respirable, there is no hazard there.
All right. The next question is, how does mineral wool thermal insulation compare to polyurethanes and polystyrene's thermal insulating values? While not applicable to the fibers and the health side of it, polystyrene has an R value of 3.6 to 4.2 inches per, or R3.6 to R4.2 per inch. Polyurethane, which is your spray foam, has an R value of about 7 inches per inch, R7 per inch. And then mineral wool is very similar to polystyrene at 4.2 to R4.3 per inch. So you're looking at very competitive products there in terms of R value. But, you know, when you're looking at product performance, you also need to look at the flame smoke rating. And so, you know, mineral wool has a 0 flame, 0 smoke spread, or smoke developed, I'm sorry. And whereas polyurethane and polystyrene have a higher flame and smoke rating. So again, like I said earlier, those are just things you need to consider as you're selecting your material. The next question is, can I get credit hours for this webinar? The answer is yes. This is an AIA approved webinar, and you will receive your certificate of completion by Friday. Are there any other health hazards for mineral fibers beyond cancer?
Maybe a trick question. There is no cancer hazard with mineral fiber insulation. The only other hazards, not so much health hazards, are that of mechanical irritation. And we've talked about the PPE to avoid that irritation, temporary mechanical irritation. Probably get, you know, things like long sleeve shirt, gloves, eye protection, long pants, things like that. And then for those applications such as blowing loose fill insulation in a small attic where you're going to experience fiber concentrations greater than 1 fiber per cc, we would recommend the N95 dust mask. But you do not need that dust mask for the vast majority of the exposures where you're going to be working with fiberglass, and that would include manufacturing, installation, renovation, demolition, and then fabrication. We just don't see fiber exposures that are very high at all in those applications.
Excellent. I'll take the next question, and that is, what health hazards are associated from duct particles coming from ducts in commercial buildings that have internal liners? So like we talked about earlier in the presentation, you really don't see a lot of duct particles. This is fiberglass particles breaking off from the duct into the airstream. The particle concentrations in indoor buildings are extremely low in commercial and residential buildings. And you're looking at, like I said, 0.0001, less than 0.0001 fibers per cubic centimeter, which is substantially lower. And then beyond that, you know, these are all biosoluble fibers used in our HVAC duct insulation. So there's not a health hazard associated from duct particles on ducts that are lined with fiberglass insulation. The next question is, what is the role of formaldehyde in insulation? Are we phasing it out, et cetera?
For fiberglass home insulation, bats and rolls, at one time, those rolls were using bats and rolls were using a formaldehyde-based binder. Remember that unlike paper fibers, glass fibers are chemically inert and they will not naturally stick together. So if you're going to have a rigid form, whether it's a bat or a roll, you have to spray a glue on them. That is called what we call a binder. And previously for fiberglass home insulation, the bonded products had formaldehyde as one of the components in the binder. All of the major manufacturers have moved away from formaldehyde-based binders for home insulation bats and rolls. All
right. The next question is very interesting, and I don't know that we've actually tested it, but the question is, can the insulation provide a safeguard against COVID-19 or other airborne viruses?
Boy, that's a rather topical question there. I don't know of any insulation that is effective against COVID-19 or any other viruses or bacteria for that matter. It's just, we just don't know that. And I know of no insulation that can serve that function or has that ability. And I would tell you that the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, is really starting to crack down on unsupported COVID-19 claims for products. And I would say, you have to remind too, the permacoat lining that we have on our duct liner, fiberglass duct liner, is not there to kill bacteria to improve indoor air quality. It's really there to make sure that any mold or mildew does not intrude into the duct liner. So the antimicrobial agent is in the liner to protect the product, not to improve indoor air quality.
All right. The next question is, what is the difference in the health benefits between fiberglass, specifically in flexible ductwork, and sheet metal ductwork, referring to mold, et cetera? I think right out of the gates, you're looking at not really a difference in a health benefit for either. It's typically, flexible duct is typically used in residential applications, and sheet metal tends to be a little bit more common in commercial applications. But beyond that, if you were trying to compare a side-by-side, which one is going to offer me a more health benefit, I wouldn't say that either one has a significant health benefit either way. Bruce, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
What I might add is that, remember, mold will grow on the dirt or the dust, so that anywhere you're going to get a combination of, the right temperature, a food source in terms of dust or dirt, and some moisture, you can possibly get some mold growth. And so even for an uninsulated bare sheet metal duct, if you do start to see any kind of dust or dirt accumulating on that, you could potentially have mold growing in an uninsulated bare duct.
All right. After the insulation is covered with drywall, how could there be a safety concern?
I don't think there is.
I agree.
And frankly, there really isn't any hazard other than mechanical irritation, even before you rock up the wall.
Excellent. The next question is, how safe is mineral wool?
Mineral wool is safe to manufacture and use when, as we say, certain common sense precautions are taken to avoid temporary mechanical irritation, like long sleeve shirt, long pants, gloves, and some eye protection. Just like glass wool fibers, the mineral wool fibers are sufficiently biosoluble that they do not persist in the lung long enough to present any kind of cancer hazard by inhalation.
Excellent. So the next question is, some people have said that they question how inhaling, quote, glass is not hazardous. Can you please compare fiberglass to the small glass shards that might be encountered, for example, when you break a glass bottle?
I suppose the most meaningful distinction is that remember that glass fibers are very, very small. So that, and we've had this question before where, well, how can glass be soluble? I can put water in a drinking glass and it'll be there forever. The issue is that these glass fibers are very small. They have very small diameters. Some of them 1 micron, below 1 micron. So you're talking about something that's thinner than a human hair. And with that kind of size, your mass to surface area ratio is such that it's particularly susceptible to dissolution, especially in lung fluid or simulated lung fluid. Compare that to shards of a broken glass or something where they're actually, on the scheme of things, they're very large, they're very heavy, and so they would not be capable of undergoing the kind of dissolution that glass fibers could.
Excellent.
If that's helpful.
That is, I think you explained it well. So in your list of definitions, what category does asbestos fall into? And this was referring to our the list that I went through of the vernacular used in this field of study, asbestos falls into the biopersistent category. I don't know if you want to add to that, Bruce.
Well, a couple of things. I mean, we're talking, our webinar here today is talking about SVF, synthetic vitreous fibers, fiberglass and mineral wool. Asbestos is a natural fiber, not a synthetic fiber. And we know, and there's lots and lots of science peer-reviewed articles published for many years that basically help people understand the differences between natural asbestos fibers and then the synthetic vitreous fibers. And it is very well established. All the data show that fiberglass and mineral wool are, shall we say, toxicologically, morphologically, and chemically distinct from asbestos. Although they have some, superficial similarities in terms of they're both fibers. They're actually very, very different, and they have especially very, very different hazards. Asbestos fibers do present a cancer hazard. It's well established. In contrast, synthetic vitreous fibers do not, that are used for insulation, do not present a cancer hazard.
Great. Bruce, can you talk a little bit about what are your thoughts on the consensus that fiberglass and man-made vitreous man-made vitreous fibers diameters, the airborne ones, with the exception of ceramic fiber, are generally large, 1 millimeter, and thus non-respirable?
If you look at insulation fibers, typically they have a distribution curve for the diameters, so that say you have a nominal or design diameter to achieve the thermal and acoustic performance. It should be above kind of the 5 micron diameter respirability, but you're going to have a tail to the left of the mean that's going to be a respirable fraction of the total fibers. So you will have some respirable fibers even with the insulation, glass, and mineral wool fibers.
Excellent. This is an interesting question. What are the precautions for workers who smoke or vape, including THC products? Should they take any additional precautions?
Yeah, the big precaution they should take is to discontinue those activities. We will say one of the things that jumps out at you, for example, when you read Dr. Marsh's 2001 cohort epi study update, is that the smokers in the cohort fare particularly poorly overall. They have a much, much higher death rate, and they have an early death rate. So smoking is just really, really bad for you.
All right. This one's new to me, so we might need to take a note on this one, but what is the relationship of fiberglass with PM10 and PM2.5 particulate matter regulated by state environmental regulators?
Well, that's an interesting question. The particulate matter and then the fine particulate matter, especially the PM2.5, there's a couple of, I'd say a couple of important distinctions between just kind of fine particulate matter as EPA regulates under the Clean Air Act versus, the respirable fraction of the synthetic vitreous fibers. I know one of them is that you can get some of these particles that are vanishingly small, and so that you can see they're not only inhaled, they can actually leave the lung and go into the bloodstream. They're so small. In addition, we haven't really seen any kind of chemical type toxicology for synthetic vitreous fibers. In contrast, I know that with some species of fine particulate that EPA regulates, you get a chemical type of toxicity. in the lung. So there is a big distinction there.
All right.
And I would say, let me add this though too. I mean, we have such a small amount of glass fibers being emitted from the manufacturing sites, so that glass fibers are really not considered fine particulates for Clean Air Act purposes, at the manufacturing sites.
All right. The next one is an interesting question, and that is who sponsored or paid for the scientific studies that were done, and were they not dependent upon industry funding?
I would have to say all of the major studies, animal studies and epi studies, were funded in whole or in part by the industry by the fiberglass and mineral wool industry through the North American Insulation Manufacturers Association. And it's important to understand that if you look at the journal articles such as the new cancer epi meta-analysis that Dr. Agnot is publishing, they do talk in some. They have an informational section in the article telling where they got the funding to do the study. But it's important to understand that what we do as an industry, we provide the funding. The design of the study is done by the scientists. They do the study, and we do not have input on the study. When they are done, they tell us what the results are, and when they have an article written up that is peer-reviewed and ready for publication, they send us the article. They do not send us a draft of the article. We do not give comments on the article.
Excellent. So is there any thought that fiberglass liner will be allowed back into the airstream in hospitals and schools?
I'm unaware that there's any kind of prohibition.
I don't think it's actually universal. I think it might only be in some jurisdictions. So I'm not entirely certain on that one. The next question is, does rigid foam insulation fall within any of the testing referenced today?
No, we're talking just about the fibrous insulation today.
All right. Has ceramic fiber insulation, high temperature insulation, undergone these same tests?
Yes, there have been, I know, animal studies on traditional RCF, and there have been some morbidity studies on traditional RCF. Johns Manville doesn't make RCF. None of the members of our trade association make RCF, but it is a synthetic vitreous fiber, and so its hazard is really, again, determined by the 3 Ds, dose, dimension, and durability. The traditional RCF is pretty durable, and it does have a fraction that is respirable, and so there is a potential cancer hazard there by inhalation, and that is why IARC in 2001 did not downgrade traditional RCF from 2B to a 3. They kept it at a 2B, a possible carcinogen. To be fair, I would have to add that there are forms of biosoluble RCF today, and my understanding is that they have roughly the same performance as the high temp performance that traditional RCF has, but they are sufficiently biosoluble that they have been successfully exonerated in animal tests.
All right. Does the studies that were talked about here today apply to attic insulation that was installed in 1970? My concern is that these fibers could get drawn into the HVAC system and then delivered into occupied space.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's important to understand that the fibers that were tested at the RCC long-term animal inhalation study were the fibers that were in typical use back in the late 80s, early 90s. But for many companies, such as Johns Manville, our kind of workaday thermal insulation fiber for attics and walls is what we call 901 fiber. In the studies, it's also in the animal studies, it's also referred to as MMVF10, man-made insulation, man-made vitreous fiber 10, and that has been in manufacturing use for many decades. So the chances are that if you have insulation in an older home, it's still going to be biosoluble.
If you have fiberglass insulation in an older home?
Yes, yes.
Just to clarify that. If you have an asbestos insulation in an older home, then you should work with professionals and have that removed.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so here's an interesting question. What are the long-term effects of insulation or mineral wool to the eye? Well,
one of the things that we do is we recommend that when you're working with fiberglass and mineral wool that you wear eye protection. We do have, if you look at our safety data sheets, we do have some, not only precautions, but some instructions on how to handle if you were to get, a piece of fiberglass or glass fiber in your eye. And I think a lot of it has to do with just irrigating it out.
All right. What in the lungs or respiratory system would cause the breakdown of fibers to either dissolve or break into shorter fibers to allow the fiber to be carried away? This was the macrophage that Bruce had discussed earlier. You have macrophage cells all throughout your body, but they are responsible for finding those particles, fibers, anything that shouldn't be in your lungs, and dissolving it and removing it from the system.
But, understand that extracellular lung fluid is not like distilled water. It has various chemical components in it that promote the dissolution of any respirable glass fibers. They have things like, citrates and phosphates and other chemicals that do help promote that. In addition, remember that the macrophage, when it tries to engulf these glass fibers, it releases low pH enzymes, acids, and that also drives dissolution of the fibers. And for the biosoluble fibers, that's one of the real mechanisms at work where we see this the breaking up of a longer fiber into shorter fibers that are then carried out. It has to do with those macrophage enzymes, those acids that eat at the fiber too.
All right, and our final question, is there any progress or research being done to eradicate the fiberglass mechanical irritation on skin?
The mechanical irritation occurs largely because of the diameter of the glass fiber. The larger the diameter to a certain point, the greater the potential for some of that temporary mechanical irritation. We know that when you have glass fibers where the diameters are very, very small, such as some of the microfiber products that Johns Manville makes, you can touch those, feel them, and there's no irritation at all. So it has to do, it has to do with the diameter of the fiber. And that's why if you're going to get some of those a little bit larger fibers in insulation wools, they can cause that temporary mechanical irritation. And that's why we suggest people use gloves and a long sleeve shirt among other precautions to avoid that irritation.
Excellent. Well, we had a lot of great questions today, and I want to thank everybody who decided to stay on with us and everybody who participated in our webinar today. As I mentioned, you will receive a survey immediately following the webinar, and we'd appreciate it if you take your time to offer your feedback. If you have any additional questions that you weren't able to ask, you can submit those in the survey as well, and we'll respond to you directly via email. And also, please keep an eye on your inbox for your certificate of completion. That'll be sent to you via email by Friday. And again, you can submit those for AIA credits if you'd like to. Recording of the webinar will be posted to our website on the source in the following week. And as soon as it's live, we will send you a link to the webinar directly so that you can watch it again if you'd like, or share it with your colleagues who you think might find it interesting. So thank you very much for attending today. We hope you all stay safe, wash your hands, social distancing, and all that good stuff. So take care and enjoy the rest of your week.